Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with great symphonies by the numbers. And we're already up now to Symphonies numbers 8. 8! Look at that! 8 symphonies, composers who wrote 8 or more. And these are the big 8, 16 of them. 16 Eighth Symphonies. And, you know, I thought that as we're getting up there, it was going to get harder because we are slowly, losing composers. But actually, we still have quite a few. We got a little ways to go. We're doing all right. I really think we are. And it only allows me an opportunity as we get up there, and if there are some prolific composers out there, to bring in some new names that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to mention previously because I'm limited to 16. And I have planned this so that I can try and introduce new people, although I'm going to be stuck with, a core of the usual suspects the further out we go. And this is part of the fun, isn't it? It's interesting. It's interesting to see who stays in and who comes in and who's out. So, are you ready for the 16 number 8s? Let's begin. Haydn, Symphony number 8, Night. The Le Soir, the morning, noon, and night symphonies, 6, 7, and 8. And after this, Haydn could be in every single list we do. And he kept writing wonderfully great symphonies after number 8. But he's going to drop out for a little bit, maybe permanently. We'll see how many numbers we get to. I don't anticipate that we're going to get to, Symphony number 87 by anybody, even though we could do some of those. But we have the Haydn Symphony Crusade to get the rest of Haydn's and many other lists and things that we can play with. Because I'm having so much fun doing these. I can't stop. I'm sorry. I really am. It really is just such a fun thing to put these things together. So Haydn's Symphony number 8 is the first great 8. And it's just a wonderful piece, a beautiful piece with solos for all of that shiny new orchestra that Prince Paul Esterhazy bought and had a Kapellmeister to write for. After that, well, of course, Beethoven's Eighth, the funniest of all of his symphonies, the shortest, the most compact, also in many ways the most exciting. And I've talked about the Eighth a lot, particularly that amazing climax in the first movement, which is simply the most intense couple minutes of music that Beethoven or anyone else ever wrote, practically. It's unbelievable. And so Beethoven's Eighth is definitely up there, as are all the Beethoven symphonies, right? Of course. Actually, I didn't do 1 and 2, did I? I did other people. I thought that was kind of fun. It was fun to watch everybody jump up and down and panic because Beethoven didn't show up until the Eroica. Next, Pettersson, Alan Pettersson, who's been in this list now. He's reappearing. We joke a bit about Pettersson because his music is so dire and miserable. And miserable in a good sense, mind you. I don't mean miserable. It's dark. It's dark. It's sad. It's tragic. He was a very self-obsessed guy. His health was lousy. His life was miserable. And he expressed that in his music. But he did it, of course, as all great artists do, in music that is moving and intense and gripping and worth listening to and emotionally very draining. He's in that list too. But the Eighth Symphony is my favorite, actually, of all of them. It's in 2 movements, unlike the usual single movement behemoths that he usually does. And it's really just an extraordinary piece. It makes the most amazing play with a simple da-da, that little interval, whatever it is, I don't know. But he just repeats it over and over again. Da-da. And he did the same thing with a sequence of chords in the 7th Symphony. It's a static, mute, terrifying motive, simply because it never changes. Everything, all this stuff is going on around it. All this chaos and turmoil is going on around it. But then behind it all you hear is da-da. And so whenever you hear it, you go, oh, God, here it comes. Watch out. Duck, cover, get out of the way. The apocalypse is upon us. But it's on the other side. There it is. Da-da. It's just, it's terrifying, like I said, in a great way. It's wonderful. There's nothing else like it. So Pettersson, Symphony number 8, incredible. Holmboe, who is now appearing regularly as well. His Symphony No. 8 is subtitled the Sinfonia Boreale, which is the Northern Symphony, the Nordic Symphony. It is a fantastic work, a beautiful work, and it does have, what is a Nordic Symphony? It's an interesting question. Your Sibelius, your Nielsen, and a whole bunch of other composers who are less well known. But it has something to do, if anything, with a certain austerity of sound, a certain bleakness, maybe, now and again, a love of nature, an expression of that love of nature in the music, a terse lyricism. There's another Nordic symphony, actually, that sort of does that, Howard Hansen's, because he was a Northern European American and had very much that same philosophy in a way. So, the Holmboe is a fantastic piece. And, as we've been going through these from about the fifth on, I think Holmboe has been in this list. Really, really fine music. These middle period Holmboe symphonies are masterpieces. They're great, great works. So next, Villa-Lobos. He's been popping up now and again. His middle symphonies also are quite interesting. As I've said before with Villa-Lobos, it's like taking a chunk of music, a big chunk, and just cutting it up into pieces and calling them different things because, one picks up where the other left off. And they're all a little bit different from each other, but so recognizably Villa-Lobos. And they're not easy works. They really aren't. I mean, they sound somehow Brazilian somehow, and they sound like Villa-Lobos, which is, impossibly difficult string writing with, juxtaposed with odd low-lying chords in the trombones. And I mean, they have a very characteristic sound, but they take some getting used to, and they're worth getting used to because they're awfully interesting. So after Villa-Lobos, actually before, because I skipped one, George Lloyd, one of my faves. Oh, he's such a great composer, and his Eighth is one of his great symphonies. It really is a tremendous piece of music. Great, great fun to listen to. It's it's a big piece. It's like 45, 50 minutes or so. I think it's in 3 big movements. Yeah, it's in 3 big movements. And it's typical Lloyd. It's funny to say that because no one knows what typical Lloyd is. But what it is wonderful tunes, beautifully scored, shapely presentation. It sounds like a 19th century romantic symphony written in the 20th century. I mean, that's what George Lloyd is. You cannot mistake him for earlier music. It's classically 20th century, especially in the handling of the orchestra and the various instrumental groups. But it's if you like your really good romantic symphonies, you're going to like Lloyd, guaranteed. So after those two, that's Lloyd and Villa-Lobos, Peter Mennin. Peter Mennin, Symphony No. 8. Now, one of you said, oh, I was so horrified. How could you leave out Peter Mennin's 7th, the Variation Symphony? Well, I left it out. Sorry. It's very, very good. Peter Mennin was a very fine symphonist as well. He was, the head of Juilliard at one point before, William Schumann showed up. He is a distinctive composer. He's never going to be hugely popular, I think. He didn't really write that way. His music is that American neoclassical school, which was largely staffed by Italians, or people of Italian descent, Walter Piston and Creston. And I mean, they all changed their names to not sound Italian. Mennin was Menini, but they were Italian. And they wrote in a very succinct neoclassical, I would almost call it Nordic. I really would, except they weren't Nordic. They were Southic. But still, it's an angry piece, the Eighth. Oh, it's so much fun. It's a really angry, kind of gnarly, exciting, rhythmic, bony piece of music. You can really, gives you a punch. Fun music, marvelous music. Then Dvorak. Dvorak the Eighth, one of the most fascinating pieces of music written in the entire 19th century. The one that befuddled Brahms. because he couldn't figure out what Dvorak was doing because his approach to form was so unique and masterful. And, you know, one of the things about Dvorak is that when he is at his most revolutionary, he's also often at his most listenable. And so nobody gives him any credit for being just as ingenious and fascinating and worth studying as he really is. And the Eighth is one of those pieces. It was Dvorak's own favorite, which tells you something. It really does. And oh, what a glorious piece of music it is. I mean, it's all based on variations of a few simple motives that carry on through all four movements, and on sort of sideways glances at traditional forms. It's really an extraordinary piece of writing, and the more you know it, the more marvelous it becomes. But it never ceases to be anything other than a glory of euphony and mellifluousness and fabulous tunes, glowingly orchestrated. Really, really amazing. It just goes to show that you can be brilliant, intellectually brilliant, and enormously popular at the same time, but the intellectuals will never credit you for it, ever. You know, if you want to be like intellectually thrilling, you're supposed to be difficult and irritating and off-putting and appreciated only by a teeny tiny minority of true believers. You can't possibly be popular. Well, Dvorak proves him wrong. So after Dvorak, Laszlo Lajtha. You know, that's that wonderful Hungarian composer who wrote 9 symphonies. Actually more than 9, but 9 numbered symphonies and then some other things. He was an extraordinary composer whose music was rather ruthlessly suppressed because he supported the 1956, the Hungarian Dawn, which was suppressed by the 1956 revolution. He was on the wrong side. Fortunately, he had a publisher in France who published all his music. So it's all out there, and it's all been very nicely recorded on Naxos, originally Marco Polo and Naxos, and you should get to know him. I did a talk on his 6th Symphony, and I played some excerpts from the slow movement, which is absolutely beautiful. He had a very distinctive style. He really did. It was a very, very voluptuous style with like lots of percussion, 9 percussionists often in his pieces, and he puts footnotes at the bottom of all of his scores saying, the fact that I have lots of percussion does not mean that the music should ever sound brutal or crude. No. And it isn't. It really isn't. It's very delicate. It's very impressionistic. The style is French-Hungarian, if you can imagine such a thing. Much better than Ravel's Tzigana. I mean, the real deal French-Hungarian, not fake French-Hungarian. It's Hungarian-French, let's put it that way, not French-Hungarian. So Laszlo Lajtha is definitely worth hearing. Then Karl Amadeus Hartmann, his final symphony. And I included the 7th and the 8th in this list. You should, of course, listen to all 8 of them if you have a chance, because, as I said before, the 7th and the 8th were the only 2 that Hartmann wrote from scratch. All the rest were reworkings of earlier pre-World War II pieces, and that doesn't matter. That just gave me an excuse to talk about other music till I got to 7 and 8, because I need him. I need him for 7 and 8, and he is the great German post-war symphonist, and his style is neoclassical atonal, sort of. In other words, he uses basically Baroque forms, passacaglia, toccata, fugue, things like that. The melodic and harmonic content is basically atonal, but usually quite listenable and very exciting. I mean, his music has enormous rhythmic drive. Stravinsky is also a big influence, as I've said before, and he's really worth a listen. He's a very, very good composer. So after Hartmann, Tubin. Thank God for Tubin, who wrote a big pile of symphonies as well. And his 8th is it's also a wonderful piece. It really is. It's got a climax in the central movement that has, you know, the tam-tam going crazy, at least on the Bis recording, mind you. It's quite extraordinary. You know, Tubin's later works become a little bit more acerbic, a little more melodically austere, but they're still very, very intense, well-written, tightly woven, organic, Nordic symphonies, and beautifully worth hearing, wonderfully worth hearing. The Bis recording is the one to get, by the way, if you're going to hear the 8th, and I think it comes coupled with the 3rd. Well, you can get a box of all of them, but if you can still get it separately, It comes with a third, which is really wonderful. It's a wonderful piece, earlier in style, but terrific. Next, Vaughan Williams, with the finale that includes all the phones and spiels known to the composer. You've got vibraphone and glockenspiel and bells and a celesta and everything. It's so much fun. Enormous fun. Beautiful, beautiful piece of music. It's a light work and a short work. It's one of only 2 Vaughan Williams symphonies that end loudly. The other one, in case you're wondering, was number 4. I mean, number 9 kind of does. It fades away, but it has a crash before the fade. It's late Vaughan Williams. Again, you know, when composers are getting late, they start to get a little spacey. I mean, Vaughan Williams had just written the Sinfonia Antarctica, which was very spacey, and explored, you know, his interest in exotic sonorities. And the Eighth continues that process. There are the inner movements. One is just for brass, one is just for strings, and you've got variations in search of a theme for the first movement, and the finale is a toccata. God, it's fun. I have a set of tuned gongs just to perform that symphony, actually, for the finale. You need 3 tuned gongs, and it is so much fun to listen to. Absolutely wonderful. There's also an optional part for tam-tam if you don't have the gongs, and I think some performances just use both, or they just bang away at a lot of things. It's sort of hard to tell what's going on back there. And they're going da 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 dum bum bum bum, and you know, the gongs are going bong 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 like that. Anyway, it's great fun. We have 4 more. And boy, we've left out some biggies, haven't we? Here's the biggest of all, Mahler, Symphony No. 8, the Symphony of 1,000, which doesn't really need 1,000 people to do it, though it's nice if you have them. If they happen to be walking, you know, down the street in front of the concert hall and you want to get them in, you might as well do it. It's not my favorite Mahler symphony, probably because it's sung all the way through. You know, I like Mahler as a composer of orchestral music better often as not, but it's a great work, without a doubt, an extraordinary work and an important work, because it was one of the first symphonies of its type to use multiple texts by different authors. I mean, there's the first movement is the Veni Creator Spiritus, a prayer, and the second movement is the final scene from Faust, which everybody did. I mean, you know, Schumann did it, Liszt did it, lots of people did it. Frankly, Mahler's is the best. It really is. It's, even if it does have, you know, there's that middle section where you have the trio of the 3 irritating women, and you know, there are moments where you wish you would sort of get on with it, but that's a performance problem. You know, the better conductors know when to move things along. But the fact of the matter is that using these different texts and showing symphonically, musically, how the texts are related in terms of the text, I mean, how the texts are related, the words are related in terms of ideas and concepts, and Mahler does this musically across the span of the symphony. It's really kind of amazing. And it was the model for all kinds of later multi-textual works of that kind. I mean, the Britain War Requiem, for example, would never have been the Britain War Requiem or his Spring Symphony without Mahler's Eighth. These collections of poetic texts in symphonic form, more or less. So, yeah, great piece, important piece, wonderful piece, lots of fun. Next, Bruckner's Eighth. Of course, we have to talk about Bruckner's Eighth. It's his biggest symphony. It's, some consider, his greatest symphony. I don't know. I think the Fifth is probably his greatest symphony, you know, the most perfectly realized of all of them, because the Eighth, naturally, exists in at least 2 versions. I say at least because the horrifying Bruckner people have created an interim version that Bruckner never actually heard or intended to be heard or finished or wrote. But, you know, in case you were just wondering how bad things were going to get before he got to his final version, there's this interim thing. Yeah. The Eighth as we know it, that is the revised Novak version, or the Haas, it doesn't matter which, is the one to listen to. It's an amazing, amazing piece with a glorious finale and an exceptional slow movement with 2 cymbal crashes. Actually, the original version of that had like 6. which showed you that Bruckner even couldn't get that right the first time around. But it's just an extraordinary work, and I don't need to tell you that because you already know that Bruckner's Eighth is one of the major ones. And after Bruckner, Schubert, the unfinished. We have to do the unfinished, right? This is the symphony that Schubert never finished, right? This is the symphony that Schubert never finished. He never finished. Right? Yeah. This is the symphony that my mother used to play all the time while she was doing housework. So I grew up hearing the unfinished symphony. Fortunately, Mom finished the housework. Thank you, Mom. I mean, that made our lives much better, as did hearing Schubert's Unfinished while it was being performed. Glorious music. Wonderful. I'm so happy that we finally got to Schubert. Some of you wanted Schubert in there with maybe the fourth, the tragic, or the fifth. The fifth could have been in there. It's such a beautiful work. But you'll see Schubert next time as well. You know that's coming, so what the heck. And last but not least, here's one that might surprise you. Penderecki's Symphony No. 8, his Lieder der Vergänglichkeit. Now, Penderecki's later symphonies are often vocal, and beautifully so. He's a very fine, he wrote mostly choral works, or a lot of choral works, the Polish Requiem and the St. Luke Passion and, lots of things like that. And the Eighth Symphony, which is a series of songs, it's in the style, more or less, of Das Lied von der Erde or the Eighth, those Mahlerian song symphony type things. And it's fabulous. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's not overly long, and you've got a text to follow along with it. And the words are very, very moving and extremely, extremely sensitively set. And Penderecki as a symphonist, I think, deserves props. His seventh was the Seven Gates of Jerusalem, a big choral oratorio type thing. But I think his Eighth Symphony is a better work. It's more concise. It's certainly, I find it more enjoyable to listen to, but it really, really moving. A deeply moving and beautiful and impressive piece. And I really want to urge you to give it a listen if you have a chance. I think you'll be very, very pleasantly surprised and very touched by both the words and the musical settings. And with that, we have 16 Symphonies numbers 8. It's Symphonies by the numbers. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.